In the Impact segment tonight, President Obama's big advantage in the upcoming election, that is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. Last night, Dan Rather, who canceled his appearance on The Factor, talked with Jon Stewart about liberalism in the national media.
I know what it's widely believed that CBS, NBC, ABC, chock full of liberals. Not true. What it was chock full of people wanted to give honest news, straightforward news, and voted both ways in many elections. I'm not saying that nobody in the newsroom was liberal any more than I say anybody conservative. Frequently what happened, people who are described themselves as conservatives want to say, I worked at CBS News and almost everybody there was liberal. What they really mean is not everybody there agreed with them all the time. This is a sham.
All right, with all due respect to Mr. Rather, his statement is a sham. He's not telling the truth. Here are the facts. After the presidential race between George Bush and John Kerry, the University of Connecticut surveyed 300 journalists nationwide. The study found that 52% of the journalists voted for Kerry. Just 19% went for Bush. The rest would not answer the question. In 2008, NBC News identified 143 journalists who made political contributions. 125 of them gave to the Democratic Party. Just 16 out of 143 donated to the Republican Party. 2 gave to both parties. Also, 2008, the Pew Research Center studied 43 news outlets in America in the run-up to the Obama-McCain election. About 35% of the stories done on Barack Obama by those organizations were positive. Less than 20% were positive when it came to John McCain. Those are the facts, Mr. Rather, and they're grim if you believe the media should be fair and balanced. Just today, the website Politico ran a story about how the Washington Post is covering Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Post reporter David Moranis has a new book out called Barack Obama, The Story. In that book, Moranis documents the president's drug use as a young man. It was extensive. The Washington Post ran that story on page 6. But earlier this month, the Post ran a 5,500-word story on page 1 detailing Mitt Romney's high school hazing resume. I mean, come on. Fair-minded people know that much of the media is actively working to see that Barack Obama is reelected. Dan Rather would never admit that, but it's absolutely true. So the question becomes, how much will the liberal press influence the election? And by the way, there was a press blackout of the gender abortion Planned Parenthood scandal this week. Total blackout. We'll deal with that in just a few moments. Talking Points believes the media will deliver some votes to Barack Obama next November. And in a tight race, that could be enough. And that's a memo. Now reaction. Let's bring in the purveyor of BernardGoldberg.com, who's in Miami this evening. Bernie Goldberg worked with Dan Rather for about 15 years. So what say you?
Well, I'm not sure, Bill, why you have a media analyst on to talk about this. I think you need a psychiatrist because what Dan said is delusional. I mean, it's delusional. Number one, his problem and his dispute is not with conservative critics of the media. It's with the American people, because poll after poll after poll show that large numbers of Republicans and Democrats, of conservatives and liberals, believe the media has a liberal bias. That's number one. Number two, when I was writing my book, A Slobbering Love Affair, right after the last presidential election, I quote several prominent and highly well-respected journalists in Washington. And one of them, a fellow named Charlie Cook, who is a very well-respected political journalist, said, let's face it, is there a Democratic and a liberal bias in the media? Of course there is. I think you can say that the media had a finger, more than a finger, on the Democratic side. So this is simply ridiculous and delusional, and the facts you gave in the talking points more than prove the point that there is an abundance of liberalism in the media, and they don't keep it to themselves enough.
Not anymore. I mean, there's a book out on Walter Cronkite now, and Mr. Cronkite, very, very left-wing guy, much further left than I think you thought he was. I certainly didn't. I knew he was liberal,
right.
but I didn't think he was off the chart left, which he is.
Right.
And this book documents that. And Rather took over, and Cronkite tried to hide it. I mean, it'll come out in little ways. But he did, he was respectful to authority. He went along with the Vietnam War in the beginning. He wasn't some crank. Rather pushed it, toward the liberal precincts. I know he killed a couple of stories of mine that didn't reflect his political correct vision. One on gays in Massachusetts he killed, and there were a couple of others. But at this point, I think we've established the fact, and we don't have to really debate it any longer, that what you just said is absolutely true. So then a question
Can I give you one?
Go ahead.
Can I give you one example? Because you mentioned the Vietnam War. This is something that I've written about, and it needs to get a lot more play than it's gotten so far. At the end of August of 2004, when John Kerry was getting shellacked by the Vietnam Veterans for Truth, the Swift Boat veterans, I'm sorry, for truth, over his war record in Vietnam, Dan Rather gave an interview to a national news magazine, Broadcasting and Cable, in which he said, in the end, what difference does it make what one candidate or the other did or didn't do during the Vietnam War? In some ways, that war is as distant as the Napoleonic campaigns. 1 week later, not 1 year later, not 1 month later, 1 week later, the same Dan Rather is on 60 Minutes Wednesday on CBS telling us about what a candidate did or didn't do during the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam was,
and of course that was President Bush, and that was his National Guard service. So he said, look, it doesn't matter with Kerry, and he makes a big deal about Bush. Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now you got him.
Oh, okay.
Now he's 80 years old. He wouldn't come on this program because he may be 80, but he still knows that I would have hit him with the three things the University of Connecticut, NBC, and he couldn't. He couldn't. You know. But the question now becomes: how much of an advantage is it? 5% for Barack Obama because the media, and I'm including entertainment industry in that as well, because you're going to get the comedians, you're going to get Entertainment Tonight's, you're going to get all of that into the pro-Obama camp. How much does it matter?
Okay, the last time you asked me that, a month ago, I said I didn't think it mattered very much. But since then, I'm having second thoughts. Since we spoke last, the Washington Post runs that page-one story about what
the hazing,
what Mitt Romney did, 50 years ago in high school, right? The New York Times runs a page-one story about Ann Romney's elite hobby of riding these expensive horses and jumping, hurdles and all that. Now, these stories, it's not simply because they're in the New York Times. These stories filter out to the networks, and then they filter out to the entertainment shows and late-night comedians and all that. And they filter into the national consciousness.
Right.
And as a result, I'm starting to think, and I didn't last time, but I'm starting to think that people who aren't familiar with the issues, who don't know the Romneys, they start to say, well, this is the guy who bashed a gay kid in high school, and she's this elitist who rides these expensive horses, and it could affect how they see these people, and in a tight race can have more of an impact.
I think it does.
Than
It's going to deliver a few votes. I don't, it just depends how tight it is. All right, Bernie Goldberg, everybody, and Dan Rather watching tonight. You are welcome to come in here anytime, Dan. We'll plug your book, and we have soft drinks for you, not the big kind, though.